A murder weapon, wiped clean, but not of guilt. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from. Your voices make these mysteries unforgettable. I always love reading them. If you had told me that Wednesday morning would start with a spotless knife and a spot of trouble, I'd have asked what kind of lunatic polishes a blade after using it for something you don't want discovered. That's the kind of detail Nero Wolfe notices, and the kind of thing I usually try to avoid noticing until after breakfast. But that morning, breakfast was a victim of circumstance. The circumstance being a woman in a green hat sitting in Wolfe's office, watching the clock like she was waiting for it to strike 12 and save her from the gallows. I'd let her in at 9:42 sharp. Wolfe hates disturbances before 10, but she insisted she'd lose her nerve if she waited. My job is to keep the world out until the orchids have been fed, but she was the kind of nervous that makes you believe she'd walk right into the plant rooms and start confessing to the flowers. Her name was Mrs. Lydia Dane, and she had the kind of presence that made me think she'd spent most of her life rehearsing for moments when the room needed to be hers. Slim, tailored coat, gloves that had been taken off but kept close in her lap, and a handbag big enough to hide either a small revolver or a large sandwich. "Mr. Goodwin," she said in a voice that trembled at the edges, "this isn't about murder." "That's a relief," I told her, because Wolfe considers murder the only acceptable reason to break his routine. "If you want help finding a missing cat, you're going to get me instead. Wolfe doesn't chase tabbies." She leaned forward, and I saw in her eyes that she was holding something back, not in the mysterious feminine way they put in novels, but in the way people do when the truth is heavier than they can lift in one piece. "It's about theft," she said. "Something was stolen from my husband's study last night, but the thief didn't leave fingerprints. They polished the knife." I raised an eyebrow. "Lady, most burglars aren't moonlighting as silverware restorers. What was the knife for?" Her gaze flicked to the carpet. "Cutting rope." Before I could ask what was tied up, she took a breath, straightened her shoulders, and said, "It's easier if I tell Mr. Wolfe." "Will you let me?" Now, Wolfe has a standing order. Unless they come in with a summons, a body, or a meal, they wait until 10. But this woman had that combination of fear and determination that means she wasn't leaving. So, I escorted her to the big chair facing Wolfe's desk, and I went upstairs to fetch him from the orchids. When Wolfe saw her, he gave her one of his patented looks, the kind that weighs a person like a side of beef before he decides whether it's worth cooking. He eased himself into his chair, arranged his bulk, and said, "You have 8 minutes before I return to my work. Convince me to forfeit them." She did, in 5. By the time she finished, Wolfe's eyes had narrowed to slits and his lips were compressed, which for him was practically a standing ovation. The gist was this. Her husband, Howard Dane, a collector of Civil War memorabilia, had been in a public feud with another collector over a rare bayonet. The bayonet was in a locked display case until last night. Now it was gone. The only clue? A kitchen knife from their home found on the study desk. No fingerprints. Polished until it gleamed. "And why?" Wolfe asked in his slow, precise tone. "Should I care about this bauble?" She hesitated. "Because, Mr. Wolfe, the bayonet was used in a killing. Not during the war. 3 weeks ago." The room went quiet except for the faint sound of Wolfe's breathing. He leaned back, his eyes moving just enough to meet mine. "Archie," those eyes said without speaking, "clear your calendar." I didn't need Wolfe's eyes to tell me to clear my calendar. His fingers did the talking. They made a tiny bridge in front of his chest, tips kissing, and anyone who's spent 3 months in that office knows that's the signal that motion in the outer world will be delegated while he negotiates with stillness. Lydia Dane had earned him for more than 8 minutes. He let the silence work on her for a beat. Not cruelly, just enough to ensure she understood that talk in this room had to be specific and sequential. I got up to call Fritz for coffee and a plate of something that could pretend to be breakfast, because the orchids had cost us eggs. When I came back, he said, "Begin with the killing 3 weeks ago." Who was killed? Where? And why does that bayonet touch it? She clasped her gloves so tight the seams creaked. The man's name was Peter Rell. He was the registrar at the Whitcomb Historical Gallery. There was a burglary the night he died, after hours. The police think he surprised the thief. He was stabbed once. They said the wound was particular. She swallowed. A wide triangular entry. They called it consistent with a 19th century socket bayonet. But they didn't find the weapon. Wolfe made a soft noise that could have been interest or indigestion. "And your husband possessed such an instrument?" "Legally," she said quickly. "He's a donor to the Whitcomb. His collection was often loaned. But that bayonet, it's special. A disputed provenance tied to an officer who, well, the point is, it's valuable. And 3 nights after Mr. Rell died, the rival collector, Victor Lant, published a claim that our bayonet is a forgery. He humiliated Howard. He said the Whitcomb would be embarrassed if they displayed it." Her mouth hardened. "Last night someone came to our house, opened the locked case, and took the forgery anyway." Wolfe glanced at me. "The police suspect Mr. Dane." "No," she blurted, then caught herself. Not officially. They asked questions. Howard was out of town the night Mr. Rell died. Philadelphia. But he's prickly. He threatened to sue Mr. Lant. He threatened anyone who threatened his collection. He's a man who lives by arrangement, and this ruined his arrangement. Fritz came in with a tray, caught the tone, and put it down as if the cups were witnesses. I took mine. Wolfe nodded his thanks without looking away from Lydia. "You mentioned a kitchen knife polished of prints. Why bring that detail if you didn't want it examined?" "Because it wasn't ours," she said. "I mean, the knife is from our kitchen, yes. But I'm the one who cleans the knives when the maid's off, and I don't polish. I wash, I dry, I put away. This knife, someone took it, used it to cut the twine we keep on the study shelves for wrapping parcels, and then polished it like a trophy. They left it on the desk. It was theatrical." "Twine," Wolfe murmured. "Not rope," she reddened. "Twine, I misspoke earlier." "You were nervous," he said, which, translated from Wolfe, was absolution. The twine secured the display case. The case is a glass-fronted cabinet, locked. The key is on Howard's chain, but the drawers under it were tied with twine because the left lock sticks. We keep certificates, letters, provenance files there. The twine was cut. Those drawers were rifled. And what was missing from them? She hesitated, and I didn't like it. Wolfe didn't either. His fingers tightened. "Mrs. Dane." "A letter," she said. "From a dealer in Virginia to Mr. Lant years ago. It was in our files because Howard acquired the dealer's notes later in a bulk purchase." Her eyes flitted to me and back. The letter hinted that the bayonet had been altered sometime in the 1930s to appear connected to the officer we claim. It wasn't a confession. It was suspicion. In the wrong hands, it looks like proof we knew and didn't care. "And in the right hands?" I asked. "In the right hands," she said. "It looks like a motive for Mr. Lant to frame us." Wolfe breathed out through his nose. "So, 3 threads. A killing the police attribute to a bayonet akin to yours. A rival who impugns your object's authenticity. A theft from your home that removes both the object and a document injurious to your husband. If I accept this, I will not mop the floor of your domestic litigation. I seek the truth. It may damage you." She met him squarely. "Find it." "Archie," he said, without breaking eye contact, "you will telephone Mr. Howard Dane and ask him to attend here at 6 o'clock. You will also invite Mr. Victor Lant, the Whitcomb's director, and who else?" Lydia worked her gloves. "Dr. Celia Marsh. She curated the Whitcomb's upcoming display. She's divided. Loyal to the museum, but she admires my husband's collection. And Saul. She stopped, realizing she'd guessed ahead. Wolfe's lips almost twitched. Saul Panzer will be engaged when needed. For now, the Whitcomb's director. Amos Kendall, she said. He hates scandal more than moths hate cedar. Invite him, Wolfe said. Mrs. Dane, one more matter. Why come now to me, rather than to the police again? She stared at her gloves, and when she looked up, her voice had lost its tremor. Because the police will reach for the nearest explanation, and Mr. Lant will reach for the nearest headline. I need someone who will reach for the right answer. He closed his eyes. Not from fatigue, from acceptance. Phooey. Very well. Archie. I got to the phone and started the circus. If you want to mark how the brownstone gets disturbed, you count rings. Howard Dane answered in 3, which told me his morning didn't include a commute. He wasn't pleased to be told to appear at 6, but when I said Nero Wolfe, he did an impression of a guard dog reconsidering the mailman. I called the Whitcomb and went through 2 assistants before catching Amos Kendall, whose voice had the varnished sheen of a man who thinks public trust is a brand he owns. He bridled at the suggestion of a private conclave. I said the alternative was a public brawl, and he agreed to attend for the sake of minimizing noise. Victor Lant took the longest to pin. He let his phone ring until it got bored, then oozed in with a smile I could hear. Mr. Goodwin, he said, as if he were laying a hand on my shoulder. Tell Mr. Wolfe I adore his bookshelves. 6 it is. By the time I hung up, Lydia Dane had given Wolfe a typed list of anyone who'd had legitimate access to the Dane study in the last month. The maid on weekdays, the cleaner on Saturdays, Dr. Celia Marsh twice to advise on conservation, and a handyman for the sticking drawer that got tied with twine anyway. Wolfe scanned it, then requested the house address, the alarm service, and the name of the locksmith who maintained their cabinet. That last one perked my ears. Locksmiths in our world are either saints or stagehands. You'll go to the Dane residence, Wolfe told me, and verify what can be verified without creating antagonism. Look, measure, record. Speak little. Listen more. That's my brand, I said. If I listen any more, I'll be a radio. He ignored me. Observe the study door and hinges, the cabinet lock, and the means of entry to the house. Photograph the desk with the polished knife in situ if it still is. If not, note who moved it. Ask who cleans the knives. Ask whether Mr. Dane used twine for any purpose other than binding drawers. Shall I curtsy as I go? Spare us your effusions. He turned to Mrs. Dane. Do not warn your husband that I suspect him. She flinched. Do you? I suspect everyone who benefits from confusion. He pressed a thumb into the arm of his chair. Go home. You will be called if we need you sooner than 6. She rose, thanked him with more sincerity than I'd have managed in her shoes, and let me see her out. In the vestibule, she paused, looked at the framed photograph of a prize bull that Wolfe keeps for reasons known only to him and veterinarians, and said quietly, Mr. Goodwin, if you find that my husband has lied, I want to know before the others do. I said I'd pass it on. If truth were a package, people would always want a sign before the courier knocked. On my way back to the office, I stopped in the kitchen. Fritz was slicing mushrooms like a surgeon who only accepts private patients. Coffee? He asked. Evidence, I said. Do we polish knives to a mirror here? He gave me a look you could butter toast with. I do not polish. I care, and I do not leave knives on desks. Mr. Wolfe forbids. Bless him, I said, and grabbed my hat. You collect a lot of hours in this line of work, going places you'll never see again. The Danes lived in a brownstone uptown that took itself seriously, with stonework that made you think it could survive a siege if telephones had never been invented. Lydia had given me the key code. The alarm company chirped and accepted me like a cousin. The study was on the rear, quiet, with a window to a tiny garden where a ceramic soldier stood guard over a lifeless fountain. The glass-fronted cabinet was a sturdy antique with a modern lock grafted on, a surgeon's work, clean and ugly. The bottom drawers had brass pulls, and anyone with eyes could see the left one's keyhole had the sour twist of a mechanism that preferred sulking to closing. If I had been a thief with 5 minutes and an idea of what I wanted, I wouldn't have bothered with the cabinet lock. I'd have slipped a thin pry into the back seam where the old joinery had more history than strength. But the lock showed scratches I didn't like, and the keyway had the faint smear you get when someone does a careful job with a pick and then makes sure you know it was careful. The desk carried no knife. I checked the kitchen, found a matching slot in the block with a vacancy like a missing tooth, and asked the maid, today was not her day off, where the blade had gone. "Mr. Dane took it to the police this morning," she said. "An officer called. Mr. Dane said it was best." Her name was Ruthie, and she wore her hair like it was another job she had to clock into. She didn't polish knives either, which made it unanimous. While she talked, I looked at the twine. The cut ends were clean, not frayed, as if whoever sliced them had the kind of wrist that doesn't dither. The drawers had been opened and closed again with a dutiful hand. On the blotter, impressions where papers had been spread and stacked. A half-circle watermark from a glass that had sweated too long. It smelled faintly of lemon oil and a scent I placed somewhere between expensive ink and old fabric. I took photographs, measurements, a rub of the cabinet lock's face with a soft pencil and tape, and one small liberty, a smudge under the desk's edge that wasn't dust, more like graphite or transfer from a glove that had seen a pencil. I bagged the tape, made notes a judge would recognize, and left the study as I found it except for the feeling in the air that someone had been doing a rehearsal. On the way back, I stopped at the Whitcomb. Museums are the kind of places that pride themselves on quiet, the way cathedrals pride themselves on echo. I got my visitor badge, admired a revolutionary drummer boy who had been 14 for 200 years, and found Dr. Celia Marsh in conservation. She had the narrowed eyes of someone who thinks in millimeters and talks in footnotes. I gave her my name and Mr. Wolfe's, and her shoulders did a thing that might have been respect or worry. "Was Peter Rell a friend?" I asked. "A colleague," she said. "He liked forms more than people. That's not a criticism. It's how museums run." "And the bayonet?" She hesitated, and in that half-second I watched her decide whether to lie to a stranger with a nice tie. "It is beautiful," she said finally. "It may also be a problem. Provenance is a conversation. Mr. Dane's bayonet speaks loudly. Mr. Lant insists it shouts untruths. Whose voice does the museum trust?" She tapped at the table with a thumbnail. "The one least likely to be heard in court." I thanked her, took another mental photograph, and stepped outside in time to see a cab door open like a stage cue. Victor Lant unfolded himself with the sort of grace men buy from their tailors. He saw me, smiled like we were co-conspirators, and tipped his hat a notch past parody. "Mr. Goodwin, do tell Mr. Wolfe I'm simply dying to be enlightened." "I'll pencil you in," I said, and let him enjoy his entrance. Back on 35th Street, I reported to Wolfe. He listened with his eyes closed, head tilted, as if the chair had become a confession booth and I was declaring the day's sins on behalf of humanity. When I finished, he said, "The knife's removal is vexing. But the lock, And you smelled lemon oil. Phooey. Sit. At 6 we begin the disrobing." He folded his hands and opened his eyes. "Archie, I require the locksmith's ledger before 8. "Which locksmith?" I asked. "The one who fitted that graft." The work was methodical and proud. Men who labor like that keep records like scripture. He looked toward the door as if he could see the parade arriving. "We will not accuse, we will arrange, and the polished knife. That was for us, not for the police." "For us?" I said. "For anyone with the sense to see that a man who polishes a tool after using it intends to be remembered by absence," he said. "It is a performance of cleanliness, and I do not believe in clean criminals. If there's one thing I've learned sitting opposite Nero Wolfe's desk, It's that when he says before 8, he doesn't mean by 9. He means the city can move, and you will keep up. I cut the call sheet down to one priority, the cabinet's surgeon. Lydia's list gave me a name and an address. Castle and Son, safe and lock, on a block that smelled of solder and old contracts. Son had been erased from the painted glass, but not from the family pride. The bell over the door chimed like it had a schedule, and the clocks on the wall agreed. The man at the counter had hands that knew how to argue with metal. Mid-50s, hair that refused to agree with a comb, and a loop on a chain that he lifted by reflex when he looked at me. I showed him a card. "Archie Goodwin, I've come to admire your graft work." He didn't blink. "Which graft?" "The study cabinet at the Dane residence. Glass front, antique bones. You fitted a modern lock. Clean, almost humble. If your locks had signatures, I'd recognize yours on the street." The loop made a tiny clink against his shirt button. "You talk like a man who wants something and thinks flattery is a key." "Only if it turns," I said. "Ledger, dates, who ordered, who had copies. Mr. Nero Wolfe would appreciate your help, and he doesn't say that about many trades." He held me in the loop's absence for a breath, then turned, disappeared into a back room that smelled like cut brass and oiled patience, and returned with a narrow book. He didn't open it until he had set it down between us, as if it were a treaty. "I keep names," he said, "and I keep my nose. If the police ask, I cooperate. If a private eye asks, I ask why." "A man died 3 weeks ago," I said. "The Whitcomb Gallery's registrar. A bayonet may have done it. That bayonet went missing last night from a cabinet you can vouch for. Someone made a show of a polished kitchen knife while they cut twine and pulled a letter that might start a lawsuit before it finishes a scandal. If Wolfe can keep it from being the wrong kind of noise, you'll have helped the right people." He flipped pages with a careful thumb. "Dane," he said. "Howard. Model Y87 mortise lock, fitted 6 months ago. 2 keys at installation, 1 duplicate requested a month later for doctor. Celia Marsh, authorized by Mr. Dane." His eyes flicked up. "We don't question why curators want keys. We question whether the bill is paid." He turned a page. A service call for the sticking drawer was placed 2 weeks ago, but cancelled. The note says, "Twine applied. We'll reassess after exhibit." And last night, before closing, a man came in who asked about the Y87's pick resistance. I enjoyed the little lurch my stomach did. It meant the morning wasn't wasting my time. "A man," I said, to prove I could repeat syllables. "Describe him." "Polite," he said. "Hands that didn't belong to a laborer. Accent like downtown. He said he'd been burgled and was thinking of upgrading. I explained that any lock that fits a mortise made for a different century is half compromise, half wish. He thanked me and left without buying anything. Dark hair, tall, a smile that thought it was a razor. "Brown hair," he said. "Not tall, not short." His eyes kept moving. He looked at the ledger like he knew what it was and didn't want to know too much. "Name?" If I asked, he didn't give, he said, unapologetic. But he touched the bell on his way out, twice, superstition or habit. I left with a photocopy of the ledger entries. He was modern where it counted, and a head full of keys that made themselves. Outside, the street was doing its noon impression of progress. I found a payphone anyway and called Wolfe. He listened while I read. "Celia Marsh had a key duplicate," he repeated, and somewhere in his throat I heard the gear click. Not a surprise, but a wait. Return. We prepare. On the way back, I swung by the Whitcomb again because I had the impulse, and impulses pay rent sometimes. Dr. Marsh wasn't in conservation. An assistant said she'd gone to collections to address loan paperwork. Collections was a long, white room with shelves that made neat categories of other people's memory. I found her with a clipboard and a pen like a conductor's baton. When she saw me, She put the pen down with ceremony. "Mr. Goodwin, I don't want to ask a rude question," I said, "so I'll ask a necessary one. Did you have a key to the Danes' study cabinet?" Her shoulders tightened, then relaxed the way disciplined muscles do. "Yes. Mr. Dane authorized it for occasional inspection and advice on stabilization. Antique wood reacts to climate like a cat reacts to bath time. I used it under his supervision." "Used it last night?" I asked. "No." She met my eyes. She wasn't the sort to add sugar to a number. "I was home last night, writing a label essay about a powder horn that may have been carved by a boy in 1778 and may have been carved by an adult in 1878. The public will love it either way, but my job is to have sleepless nights about May. If you'd like to ask whether anyone can verify that, I can tell you my neighbor plays the violin for 3 hours after dinner, and I bang on the wall after the first hour. He can verify that." "Was Peter Rell a man who liked locks?" I asked. She didn't blink at the pivot. Peter liked process. He thought if a thing had a lock, it was because someone had a reason for it, and reasons should be documented. He was murdered because someone did not value process. A small pause. Or because they valued it too much to let it reveal them. "Did he believe the bayonet was authentic?" I said. She let the silence act like a sieve. "He believed it was possible to present it responsibly without making the Whitcomb a party to a lie. That's not the same thing as belief. Mr. Kendall calls that prudence. Mr. Lant calls it cowardice. Mr. Dane calls it insult. My job is to call it what keeps the doors open." I left her with her baton and her shelf of choices and took a cab that knew the brownstone by heart. When I came in, the house felt like it does before a storm. Occupied air, not by bodies, but by Wolfe's intention. Fritz had started something that smelled like garlic, butter, and an alibi for any sin. Wolfe was in his chair, not reading, which is when he reads the most. "Cassell's ledger," I said, handing him the copy. He scanned it. The line with Celia's duplicate got a fingertip more than the others. "And the inquiring man," he said. "Descriptions are elastic," I said. "But if Victor Lant walked into that shop, he'd leave cologne on the bell. This man touched it twice. Habit or charm against locked fates." He grunted. "Celia Marsh is not a fool." "She's also not insult-proof," I said. "If the bayonet is found to be altered, her professional neck is the nearest stump to the block. Lant calls her a coward in public. She smiles in private, and Mr. Kendall measures press releases like a priest measures homilies." "The duplicate for Dr. Marsh," he said, tapping the entry, "is an instrument. Instruments flatter themselves when they think they are players." "It also means anyone who knew she had it could use her as a path," I said. "Peter Rell, for one. Kendall, who likes locks because donors like them. Lant, who collects grievances like cufflinks. Or our mystery inquirer, who touches bells twice." He lowered the paper. "You will telephone Mr. Panzer. Ask him to observe Mr. Lant from 3 o'clock to 6:30. Discreetly. If Mr. Lant enters a locksmith, a florist, or a newspaper office, I wish to know. Inform Mr. Panzer that an additional fee will be paid if he returns with a receipt that matters." Saul Panzer doesn't require persuasion. He requires coordinates. I called. He said, which in Saul means, "I've already put on my shoes." And the line died as if he had willed it. The afternoon shortened itself as they do when you're waiting for people to arrive with their faces. I did a quick sweep of the office. Chairs aligned, notebooks ready, pitcher of water waiting to be ignored. Wolfe's globe sat patient and smug. It knows how often he turns it for the pleasure of not traveling. At 5:40, the doorbell rang and the evening started to make sense. Howard Dane came first, alone, on time. He was the kind of tall that prefers ceilings to people. He had a jaw like a principal and the expression of a boy who has loaned out his favorite toy and suspects the world will break it. He looked at the books, decided not to comment, and shook my hand without interest. When I took his coat, it carried a dry, expensive dust. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, when I brought him in. He didn't sit until Wolfe gestured, which tells you something about hierarchy in men who collect. "Your wife has engaged me," Wolfe said, "and you will sit and answer with care, or you will leave and I will pursue the matter without you. Choose." Dane sat. "I'll answer," he said, "which tells you something else." Celia Marsh arrived 10 minutes later with a calm that had been ironed. She took the chair I indicated and folded her hands like she was in a seminar on manners. Amos Kendall slid in on a whisper of importance at 5:58, declined water with a movement of the wrist that would have served in a 17th century court, and inspected the room for cameras that weren't there. Last was Victor Lant at 6:07, apologizing to no one, smelling faintly of something he'd bought for approval and got for money. He smiled at the others like they were all part of his story. Wolfe let silence write the title page. He glanced at the clock. "Thank you for agreeing to my invitation," he said, and yes, he said, agreeing to a list that had contained the word attend in my calls. A man is dead, an object is missing, and the truth is in danger of being misplaced. I will ask questions. Your answers will save you the trouble of inventing them later for other audiences. He turned his eyes to Dane first. "Mr. Dane, did you authorize a duplicate key for your study cabinet for Dr. Marsh?" "Yes," Dane said, not looking at Celia. "Under supervision." "Supervision," Wolfe said pleasantly, "is a word that comforts the supervised." "When was the last time you saw the bayonet?" "3 days ago," Dane said. "Before I left for a donor luncheon, I checked the case as I always do. The locks were secure." "Mr. Lant," Wolfe said without moving his head, "did you visit Castle and Son Safe and Lock yesterday?" Lant looked pleased, which is his default with an audience. "I visit many purveyors of security, Mr. Wolfe. Men in my position must protect their investments." "Answer," Wolfe said. Lant measured the room, then decided the performance required generosity. "Yes," he said. "I inquired about a replacement for a display case in my own home. Mr. Castle's son is dead. The shop is a poem to trade endurance. He told me interesting things about how modern locks pretend to be better than they are." "And did you ask about a Y87 mortise lock?" Wolfe said. Lant's smile cut an extra notch. "I asked about many models. If one of them was the Y87, it would only mean I like to keep my ears open to the jargon of my enemies." "Enemies?" Wolfe's eyebrow moved a degree. "We will return to that. Dr. Marsh, your duplicate key. Where is it?" "In my office safe," she said. "If you wish to inspect." "I wish to know whether anyone could have borrowed it without your knowledge." "No one borrows my keys," she said with a flatness that could be engraved. Wolfe let his gaze travel to Kendall. "Mr. Kendall, did the Whitcomb maintain documentation on who possessed keys to loaned objects or access to private collections?" "Of course," Kendall said as if he were blessing us. "We require key logs. We lock key logs. We log who locks the logs." "Produce a copy to Mr. Goodwin by tomorrow morning," Wolfe said. And to Dane, "The kitchen knife. You delivered it to the police." "An officer asked for it," Dane said. "It had been left in my study like a calling card. I wiped nothing. I touched nothing. The maid found it. She told me. I called." "Ah," Wolfe said, and opened his eyes a millimeter more than usual. "The maid will be asked. For now, some of you have touched locks, and some of you have touched words. Before this evening ends, I propose to make them touch each other." The bell rang again. Saul doesn't use bells, but information does. I excused myself and found him in the vestibule with a face that did not call attention to itself. He pressed a folded slip into my fingers and vanished down the steps like mist that knows the timing of street lights. I slid the paper into my pocket and took 2 steps into the office. Wolfe's eyes tracked me, and I put the slip on the edge of his desk. He lifted it with thumb and forefinger and read, "If you've never seen a man who loves deduction almost smile, you've missed something instructive." He set the slip down and let it sit like bait in shallow water. "Mr. Lant," he said, almost cordial, "would you be so good as to tell us why the florist on 9th Avenue sold you a dozen white lilies at 4:30 this afternoon? And the Castle Ledger shows you requested a pamphlet on the Y-87's vulnerabilities last night." Lant's mouth did an interesting thing. He considered diving for charm and decided charm had to wait for air. The room adjusted itself, inch by inch, toward the moment when knives and polish stop being metaphors. Wolfe lifted his hand a quarter of an inch, and the brownstone, our brownstone, sacred and seldom roused, leaned in to watch him begin. Lant did a good imitation of a man choosing which mask to wear, then settled on amused indignation. "Lilies, Mr. Wolfe, are for a friend whose aunt has passed. If you intend to make botany probative, I'll leave you to it. As for a pamphlet on a lock, surely you can't begrudge a gentleman his curiosity after he's been smeared in the press by a certain collector's reckless claims." Wolfe breathed, which in that room is punctuation. "I never begrudge curiosity," he said. "I begrudge performance pretending to be prudence. White lilies at 4:30 the day you come here to play injured virtue, and a visit to a locksmith the night before a cabinet you have publicly maligned is relieved of its burden. You're not careful. You are conspicuous." Kendall cleared his throat in a tone museums use to scold donors without losing them. "Mr. Wolfe, I see no value in innuendo. Our concern is the Whitcomb's reputation, and the recovery of an object possibly connected to a crime." "Possibly?" Wolfe repeated, eyeing him as if he were reading a footnote that had wandered into the main text. "Mr. Kendall, you will have your reputation, good, bad, and purchased, when we finish. Mr. Lant, I asked about lilies because men choose their useless rituals when they feel pressure. You meant the gesture to be seen by someone. The florist, the recipient, or yourself? No matter. We proceed." He let his gaze slide to Dane. "Mr. Dane, the polished knife left on your desk. An intruder who removes an object and a letter that undermines it, then polishes the instrument of twine cutting as if cleanliness were a sacrament. That is not theft, that is address. Who among the people in this room would understand that you would understand the message?" Dane's mouth thinned. He looked at the bay window as if it could offer a simpler world, and then back to Wolfe. "Victor," he said, without the flourish Lant thrives on. "He believes reputation is leverage. He'd want me to feel exposed." Lant gave him a small, delighted bow. "I admit nothing except excellent taste in enemies." Celia Marsh's voice slid in calmly. "We could add another possibility. Someone who wants Mr. Dane to believe Mr. Lant did it. A polished knife is a theatrical touch. It points when a thief would hide." "That is more interesting," Wolfe said, eyes crossing the room to her like a ferry that knows its landing. "Theatricality is wasted unless your audience can identify the actor. Mr. Lant is an effective villain for this stage, but he is not the only one who profits from a diversion." Kendall shifted. "Profit! The museum stands to lose." "The museum stands to select," Wolfe said. "It may choose to keep an exhibit with caveats, to abandon it and praise its own integrity, or to trade noise for donations. The Whitcomb is not a cathedral, Mr. Kendall. It is a market that wraps itself in velvet. I do not begrudge this any more than curiosity, but I will name it." Celia looked at Kendall once, briefly, and then spoke to Wolfe. "If the bayonet is recovered, we must evaluate it. If it is not, we must evaluate the story. Those are the only choices that matter to the institution." "Quite," Wolfe said. His fingers made a small bridge. "Mr. Goodwin," I knew the cue. "Saul's addendum," I said, and took the slip from Wolfe's desk. "At 3:50 today, Mr. Lant visited the Whitcomb for 14 minutes. No appointment, no sign-in at the director's office. He spoke with someone in collections. Not Dr. Marsh left and purchased lilies at 4:30. He then spent 17 minutes at a newsstand on Lexington that sells trade publications and a periodical for militaria collectors, and read, without buying, last month's issue, which contains an article on lock retrofits in historical displays. He was not followed from the museum. He was followed to it, Lant laughed, because men like him don't let you pick your rhythm. And did your shadow read over my shoulder too? I hope he enjoyed the prose. Wolfe ignored him. Mr. Kendall, which member of collections would be flattered to receive Mr. Lant without an appointment? Kendall's mouth drew into a caveat. We do not encourage drop-ins. You encourage donations, Wolfe said. Name. He lost 2 seconds deciding whether to bluster and then did not. Graham Knoll, he said. Assistant Registrar. He liaises with lenders and sometimes with external experts. He keeps things moving. Does Mr. Knoll have a fondness for lilies? Wolfe asked. Kendall blinked. I have no idea what our staff send each other after hours. You have an idea about everything that touches tone, but we will return to tone when the object stops moving. Wolfe adjusted in the chair, half an inch, which for him is choreography. Mr. Dane, one more question. You authorized a duplicate key for Dr. Marsh, did you inform anyone else that she possessed one? Dane looked at Celia, and what passed between them was not hostility or alliance. Recognition, maybe, the kind that hurts. It was discussed, he said, at the museum, when we talked about stabilization. Mr. Kendall knew, Peter Rell knew. His jaw worked. I did not tell Victor. Of course not, Lant said, the velvet back on his voice. You left that to gossip. Institutions do love to hum. Wolfe's eyes closed, opened. Mr. Lant, your visit to Castle and Son the evening before the theft is an inconvenience for you. Your lilies are an indulgence. Your magazine is a habit. Of these, only the first will matter if you deny and we later confirm. I recommend you confine yourself to fewer gestures and stronger facts. He turned to Celia. Doctor, Marsh, your key. In my office, she said. I can fetch it now if it accelerates our honesty. No, Wolfe said. You will fetch it tomorrow morning for Mr. Goodwin, who will also collect Mr. Kendall's key logs. Tonight, you will all answer one small question each, and then you will leave me to think. He shifted the weight of his regard like a man redistributing coals. Mr. Dane, who benefits if the bayonet vanishes permanently? Dane's reply was immediate and low. Victor. Dr. Marsh, who benefits if it returns accompanied by a narrative of scrupulous curatorship and donor cooperation? She didn't look at Kendall. The museum. Mr. Kendall, who benefits if it returns accompanied by scandal and a sacrificial name? Kendall's lips moved before sound came. No one. Wolfe's eyebrow acknowledged the lie, not impolitely. Mr. Lant, who benefits if it returns altered, authenticated by noise, and more valuable because of the tale? Lant's grin lost a tooth. The market, he said, which is to say everyone. Free, Wolfe said gently. Everyone is the last refuge of men who plan to be first. The clock gave the half-hour a nod. Wolfe pressed his fingertips together and let the room cool. He dismissed them as only he could, without standing, with a slight inclination that made departure seem like something they had chosen. Lant smoothed his lapel and slithered out. Kendall gathered his dignity like a cloak. Celia gave me a level look that said she had more to say when the noise lessened, and Dane was the last to rise. He came close to the desk, not quite into Wolfe's air, and said, If you find that letter, if you find any copy of it. We will read it, Wolfe said, and we will not burn it. Good evening. They went, one by one, turning the house back into itself. I stayed to close the door and buy us a small island of quiet. When I came back, Wolfe had tilted his head and half shut his eyes, which is when he lights the lamps in his skull. You were right about the lock work, I said, to get the wheel turning where he wanted it. Cassell isn't just clean, he's proud. The duplicate for Celia was authorized. The cancelled service call 2 weeks ago is the sort of lullabies thieves hum to themselves, and our man at the counter remembers an inquirer who touched the bell twice. Wolfe said. Ritual again. People repeat themselves when they are making themselves up. You like Noel for the lilies. I like him for no reason yet, which is already too much. We will not touch him until we must. This case suffers from performed cleanliness. The polished knife, the attention to lock law, the lilies, the magazine. Signals. I do not trust signals when truth is available. His eyes opened fully. Call Mrs. Dane. Tell her she will not speak to her husband tonight about anything more than dinner. If she cannot oblige, disengage. I called. Lydia picked up on the second ring and said she understood before I finished. Her voice sounded older. That happens when a house learns a new idea about itself. Back in the office, Wolfe asked for the tape with the graphite smudge I'd pulled from under the desk. I set it on the blotter. He bent forward, yes, bent, and inspected the faint smear like a philatelist with a suspect stamp. Not ordinary dust, he said. A transfer, a glove that had handled a pencil, perhaps a carpenter's, or a restorer's, or a registrar's who lives by marking boxes. He leaned back again. Archie, tomorrow you will look under the desk at the Whitcomb Registrar's station, Peter Rell's former place. If the underside bears a pattern of graphite where a knee rests, we will know he leaned. If it bears nothing, we will know something else. Know what? I asked. That we have been invited to notice graphite where it should not be. He shut his eyes, then opened them and let me have a sliver of irritation. Not at me, at spectacle. I despise being invited. It encourages the wrong sort of host. We broke. For dinner. Fritz served trout that tasted like a lake had finally forgiven a fisherman, and potatoes with an attitude I admired. Wolfe ate with the focus he gives to meals and big ideas, which is his way of letting the day's facts sit in the marinade. When we returned to the office, he did not sit immediately. He went to the globe, spun it once, stopped it under his palm like a promise he wasn't making, and came back to the chair. At 9 tomorrow, he said, Mr. Kendall's key logs. At 10, Dr. Marsh's key. At 11, we will call on Mr. Graham Knoll with flowers. Lilies? I asked. Something cheaper, he said. Roses are for declarations, lilies are for forgiveness, and we are not in the business of either. We are in the business of leverage. The phone rang then, crisp and deliberate. I picked up. A voice with the politeness of the well-managed said, Mr. Goodwin, this is Ruthie. The maid I glanced at Wolfe and put it on speaker. Yes, Ruthie. Mr. Dane told me not to bother you, she said, but I thought Mr. Wolfe should know. There was a note in the kitchen trash. I don't think Mrs. Dane saw it. It's small, like from a notepad. It says, You are safe. Be clean. See. It smells like lemon oil. Wolfe's eyes cooled and brightened at once, a trick I've never managed. Do not touch it, he said, and his voice had the calm you save for explosives. Mr. Goodwin will arrive in 12 minutes. He will touch it. I was on my feet with my hat before the line clicked. Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. Subtle trespass, he murmured. At last, it announces itself without applause. See, I said at the door. C for Celia? C for clean, he said, and the corner of his mouth moved. Or for anyone who wishes us to think so. Go. The cabbie must have thought I was late for a wedding or a will reading, the way I pushed him uptown. 12 minutes was generous. I made it in 9. The Dane brownstone had the kind of quiet that isn't peace. It's people trying not to be overheard by the walls. Ruthie met me at the door like she'd been rehearsing. In the kitchen, she said, already leading me down a hallway that smelled faintly of polish and someone's attempt at soup. She kept her voice low, like the cabinets might gossip. The trash bin was lined with a fresh bag, but she'd fished the note out and set it on the counter atop a paper towel, as if it were a moth she'd caught and didn't want flying away. It was a scrap, maybe 3 inches square, torn from the top of a yellow notepad. The handwriting was narrow, the kind that keeps secrets from the reader. You are safe. Be clean. C. The paper had a faint sheen where the graphite pressed harder and the lemon oil scent hit you as soon as you leaned in. Sharp, deliberate, not something that had wandered over by accident. You found it where? I asked. In the bin under the sink. I empty it after dinner, Ruthie said, but Mr. Dane threw something in after lunch and I noticed the smell later when I was washing the counter. He didn't mention it and I didn't ask. I just thought, be clean? It sounded like more than laundry. She was right. I slid the note into an envelope I'd brought, sealing it with tape. Gloves or not, I wasn't letting Wolfe scold me for fingerprints. Who's got lemon oil in this place? Only in the study, she said. We wipe the wood with it once a month. Mr. Dane keeps the bottle in the bottom drawer of his desk. That lined up too neatly for comfort. And the bottle. Still there. She nodded, but her eyes flicked toward the hall. I checked before you came, half full, but there's a smudge on the cap I don't think was there before. I took the scenic route back to the study. The bottom drawer was unlocked, either oversight or someone making sure I saw. The bottle was there, same brand I'd seen in conservation rooms, the kind curators swear by. The smudge on the cap was darker than dust, closer to graphite. I didn't touch it. I just photographed it, twice with flash, once without. Howard Dane's voice floated from somewhere above. A measured baritone, the kind that thinks volume is for the insecure. He wasn't talking to Lydia, unless she'd picked up a habit of agreeing in short, curt answers. I left the drawer as I found it, made my way back to Ruthie and told her to forget she'd called me. She almost smiled. You think I like keeping up with your Mr. Wolfe? No, thank you. By the time I hit the street again, the note was sealed twice, the photographs in my inside pocket, and I had a new itch in my head. C could still be Celia Marsh, but lemon oil in the Dane study pointed inward. Wolfe likes the smallest circle possible. It gives him fewer people to eliminate before dessert. Back at the brownstone, I laid the envelope and the photos on his desk. He leaned forward just enough to take them without shifting the rest of him. He read the note once, again, then set it on the blotter as if it were part of the furniture now. Archie, he said, you will tomorrow inspect Dr. Marsh's office safe as intended. If the key is there, we will test whether it has been used recently. The scent, the smudge. Someone wishes us to believe in care, in cleanliness. Be clean is not a reminder, it is an alibi. For who? I asked. For the sender, the receiver, or the interpreter, he said. The message is open-ended, so it may be closed by whomever wishes to shut it. That is why it was discarded but not destroyed. An invitation again, and I have said I do not accept them. Then why keep the note? Because I may yet send it back, he said, and closed his eyes. I left him to his thinking, and took my coffee in the kitchen where Fritz was making something involving lamb and herbs that made the walls feel less like suspects. At 9 the next morning, I was at the Whitcomb, waiting for Kendall's key logs. He handed them over without looking pleased, as if the paper itself were leaking museum propriety. The logs were thorough. Entries, dates, who signed what. But one line stood out. 4 days before the theft, Graham Knoll signed out a key labeled Marsh Duplicate for cabinet consultation. Returned same day. Kendall hadn't mentioned that. At 10 sharp, I was in Celia Marsh's office. The safe was neat to the point of suspicion. Folders squared, boxes aligned. She handed me the duplicate cabinet key without hesitation. I slipped it into an envelope, marked it, and asked, any reason Graham Knoll would have needed this? She paused, and in that pause I saw her weighing her next week's piece against the cost of accuracy. "He asked to check the fit of the lock before a humidity adjustment," she said. "He said Mr. Dane had agreed. I didn't say Dane hadn't mentioned it. I just nodded, thanked her, and left with the key in my pocket. By 11, I had Kendall's logs, Celia's key, and a name that was moving up Wolfe's list. Noel's office was a cramped alcove near collections, lined with flat files and the smell of old paper. He was thin in a way that made his suits look like they were meant for someone else first. When I handed him a plain florist's box, he blinked. "For me?" "From a friend," I said. "White lilies. You like them?" His surprise was real, but it didn't mean much. Surprise is easy when you're caught off guard in public. Sure. Thank you." He set the box on his desk and then didn't open it, which was more interesting. I gave him Wolfe's card and said we'd like a word at the brownstone today, 3 o'clock. He glanced at the lilies again, then back at me. "About what?" "About locks, keys, and clean exits," I said. When I got back to Wolfe, he listened without interrupting, which is how you know you've delivered something he wanted. He turned the key over in his fingers, examined the bow, the notches, and then set it next to the note from the Dane kitchen. "Archie, there is a sequence here," he said. 4 days before the theft, Noel uses the duplicate key. 2 nights before the theft, Lant inquires about the lock. The night before, the letter and the bayonet vanish. The day after, a note smelling of the Dane's lemon oil tells someone to be clean. The lilies may be misdirection, but they are timed. Noel will come today, and he will be made to understand that his role is known, even if his motive is not yet clear. And if he didn't take the bayonet? Then he permitted someone else to do so, Wolfe said. Worse in some ways, because permission is harder to prove than possession. At 3 o'clock, Noel sat where Lant had the night before, hands folded tight, eyes flicking once to the note on the blotter. Wolfe didn't offer him water. "You had the key," Wolfe said, "and the opportunity. You also have a relationship with Mr. Lant. Do not deny it. The florist's receipt exists. You will tell us who you delivered that key to after you borrowed it under pretext." Noel's jaw shifted. "If I refuse? Then you will find yourself described in police affidavits by a man who never guesses," Wolfe said. "You are a registrar. You understand the value of provenance. You will not enjoy acquiring one in this matter." Noel exhaled slowly. "It wasn't Lant," he said. "Not directly. He asked me to make the cabinet available. Said he wanted to prove the bayonet was altered, to embarrass Dane. But he sent someone else, someone who could move faster without being seen with him." "Name," Wolfe said. Noel's eyes dropped to the note. "Celia Marsh." That landed without noise, but the air shifted. Wolfe didn't look surprised. He never does when the floor moves the way he expects. "Explain." "She told me the letter was more dangerous than the bayonet. Said if it came out, the museum would have to choose between Dane and its own reputation. She'd hide it until she could decide what to do." Lant agreed. "The bayonet was just insurance. And the polished knife?" "I didn't see it," Noel said. "She said it was presentation. That Dane would know it meant someone inside his own house had been careful." Wolfe closed his eyes, as if letting the confession steep. "Mr. Goodwin will confirm the key logs, the timing, and the absence or presence of the object in Dr. Marsh's possession. You will remain available. If you attempt to vanish, you will find I am better at pursuit than I am at reception." When Noel left, Wolfe reached for the phone. "Archie, arrange with Mrs. Dane to be here at 7, and tell Saul to keep his eyes on Dr. Marsh until further notice. Because if she still has the bayonet, she will try to move it," Wolfe said. "And if she does not have it, she will try to move herself. Either will be instructive." I called Saul. His this time sounded like a man already in position. Wolfe leaned back, the note between his fingers. A lemon-scented warning, a key moved under the cover of conservation, and a knife polished to please an audience of one. It is time to decide who the performance was for and who thought they were the director. Saul's first call came at 4:15, which for Saul is practically small talk. "She's moving," he said, and that was the whole weather report. Left the Whitcomb by the side staff exit, no bag, no coat, carrying an archival tube, not standard checkout. She's on foot, south on Ague. I said, back at him because it saves compliments for when they're needed. I told Wolfe, and he nodded once, which, if you're keeping a lexicon, translates to, "Continue the line, do not clutter the air." He sat there, turning the little lemon-scented square with 2 fingers the way a man might handle a pressed flower he dislikes but intends to keep. At 4:30, Saul again. She met a man at a diner on 27th. Corner booth. No waitress within earshot for 6 minutes because the counter got a rush. The man is not Lant, not Kendall. Mid-30s, narrow shoulders, cheap tie trying for Sunday. I've seen him at auctions. One of those go-betweens who knows the difference between consign and confess. They spoke. She passed the tube under the table. He left with it. She stayed and ordered tea like virtue. "Follow the tube," I said. "Already done," he said, and hung up before I could ask if he wanted me to bring him a medal. At 5, Saul again. The courier dropped the tube at a storage unit on 10th under the name Graham Knoll. Monthly, climate-controlled because paper deserves more loyalty than people. He used a keypad code and didn't glance at the camera. He wants to be anyone. "Sit on it," I said. "If the world catches fire, call the fire." Wolfe listened to each dispatch with the relaxed distaste of a man being proven right too quickly. When I finished the last one, he said, "A registrar's name on a storage lease, a curator's hands on a transfer, and a rival's palate for the scent of scandal. Phooey. If they intended to be hidden, they would have chosen competence as their instrument." "You think they weren't hiding?" I said. "They were staging?" "Precisely. They will say preserving," he said. "But their sequence is performance. That tube contains either the letter or a substitute for it. The bayonet, however, is not a tube's friend." "Then where's our spear?" I asked. He did me the honor of not responding to spear. "We will ask Dr. Marsh and we will ask Mr. Noel why he prefers climate control to institutional control, and we will ask Mrs. Dane what, precisely, her husband does with lemon oil when no one looks." At 6:52, Lydia arrived. She had aged 8 hours in a way that takes some women 8 years. She sat and folded her hands, and looked at the note on Wolfe's blotter and did not ask what it was. Wolfe spared her no preludes. "Mrs. Dane, your house contains a bottle of lemon oil used for wood. It was opened recently. Someone in your kitchen discarded a note that smells of it and reads, 'You're safe. Be clean. See.' Do you recognize the hand?" She took it in, not surprised, just accepting that the floor had moved again. "It could be Celia's. She writes like she speaks. Narrow, neat, as if letters should apologize for taking space." "Did she ever come to your house without your husband present?" Wolfe asked. "No," she said. Then a second passed, and honesty grew teeth. "Once, 3 weeks ago, the day after Mr. Rell died. She came to speak with Howard, but he was out. She stayed with me in the study and said the museum would be careful. She touched the cabinet glass like it could hear. She asked if we ever polished the wood. I said yes. The bottle's in the drawer. She said, 'Good. Cleanliness is a comfort.' She left. I didn't tell Howard because—" She stopped. "Because he would have called it meddling." Wolfe said. "And your husband, did he handle the lemon oil in the last 2 days?" "Yes," she said. "He wiped the desk yesterday afternoon. He said the grain looked dry. He has Rituals. The study has to be right. Wolfe was satisfied, but not pleased. Rituals again. Thank you. One more. If the bayonet returns and is judged altered, can your marriage sustain the truth? She looked at him, then at me, then at the orchids that weren't there. If the truth is that he knew and did not care, no, she said. If the truth is that he believed in the story more than the object, then we will live with the embarrassment. That is generous, Wolfe said. Generosity complicates clarity. We will do what we can to keep them compatible. He dismissed her with a slight inclination that she took like a benediction. When she was gone, he closed his eyes. We proceed. At 7:20, Saul came in without sound and gave me a look that said he had seen enough streetlights for one season. The storage unit belongs to Noel's cousin on paper, he said, which is cute, but the keypad log shows Noel's code used at 5:20. The tube is still there. I didn't touch it. I'm not a raccoon. He pulled a folded print from his pocket, a phone snap of the rental agreement on the manager's desk. Noel's name noted as authorized user. Lovely, I said. Tomorrow morning we retrieve with a warrant of attitude. Tomorrow morning we retrieve with Mr. Noel, Wolfe corrected. He will be helpful to demonstrate his lack of agency. He will bring the tube, and the tube will contain what we expect if we have been shepherded. If it contains the bayonet, I will demand to be proven wrong about human restraint. Meanwhile, I asked. Meanwhile, Dr. Marsh, he said. Celia arrived at 8, summoned with a phrasing in my voice that suggested avoidance would make her evening shorter but not better. She sat, saw the note, saw Lydia's absence, saw me, and made no effort to perform. That, in her, is performance enough. You moved an object to a storage unit rented under Mr. Noel's authority, Wolfe began, as if we'd just come in at Act 2, Scene 1, and everyone knew their lines. You told him the letter was more dangerous than the steel. You offered Mr. Lant the spectacle he craves in exchange for a pause. Her eyes showed me the moment she decided that the truth was a smaller risk than improvisation. I moved the letter, she said, temporarily, to keep it from being burned or lost in a desk. I asked Graham to keep it until I could decide with Mr. Kendall how to proceed, without destroying either the museum or the Danes. Lant, she exhaled. Lant inserted himself. He said he could make noise an ally. I believed him long enough to regret it. And the bayonet? Wolfe asked. I didn't take it, she said. I saw it last 2 days before the theft. I have not seen it since. I assumed Lant wanted it gone to force a crisis on his timetable, not ours. Wolfe nodded as if tallying his groceries. The polished knife, the note. Her eyes flicked to the square again, and this time the pupils argued. The knife is not mine, she said. The note. I wrote to Lydia after I saw how she held herself together. I wanted to tell her she was safe to tell the truth. I put it in the kitchen and lost my nerve. I do not leave lemon oil on paper as a signature. That is a coincidence I do not enjoy. Wolfe turned to me with the faintest lift of brow that means write this down. We will need to quote it later. You went to the Danes' house in the week of the murder, he said. You knew where the oil was. Mr. Noel used your key 4 days ago. Mr. Lant inquired at a locksmith the night before the theft. Mr. Dane polishes wood in his routine. This is not a circle. It is a tangle. We will render it a circle. Celia's composure thinned. I tried to protect the museum from a bad choice, she said. If I made it worse, I'll accept the cost. But I will not have Mr. Lant dictating the narrative because he can buy page space and an audience. And I will not have Mr. Dane burn a primary source because embarrassment is hot. You assume Mr. Dane would burn, Wolfe said. I do not. He will display and sue, which is a different vice. He waved her away with a motion that, in anyone else, would be dismissive. In him, it is a courtesy. Tomorrow at 9 you will meet Mr. Goodwin at the storage unit. Bring Mr. Kendall. Bring a statement drafted by your conscience and your lawyer. We will open your tube." When she was gone, the house exhaled. Wolfe looked at the ceiling as if it might stop being a ceiling and start being a canvas. "We are still without the bayonet," he said. "That abscess remains. Who removes steel and leaves paper within reach? Who performs polish for comprehension? Mr. Lant would, too readily. Dr. Marsh would not, too proud. Mr. Noel could, too petty. Which leaves Mr. Dane, who benefits least from noise and most from control." He closed his eyes. But his routines betray him. A man who polishes wood may polish a knife as an unconscious extension of his creed. Be clean is both admonition and confession. "You like him for it," I said. It wasn't a question. "I dislike him for it," Wolfe corrected, "but like is not our business." The phone rang at 8:40. This time the voice was male and taut. "Goodwin?" "Howard Dane." "My wife is distressed. She left her handkerchief on your sofa, but that's not why I'm calling. Someone entered my study at 8:20. The alarm log shows no breach. A drawer is open. Nothing missing as far as I can see, but a note was left on the blotter." "Read it," I said, and I could feel Wolfe listening. He did, each word forced through a jaw. It says, "The story is safer than the steel. Keep the story clean. See, same narrow hand, same smell. My house is not a writing desk for cowards." "Don't touch it," I said. "Don't touch the drawer. We're on our way." Wolfe lifted a palm. "Number, you will go? I will not." He closed his eyes, and in that stillness I could hear the weight settle. "Archie, take a fresh envelope, powder, camera. Note the alarm log time. Ask who disarmed the system in the last hour." I was at the door when he added, "And look again at the bottom of that drawer. Not the oil, the wood, light at a shallow angle. Tell me what it says." The cab moved like it had heard the urgency from my shoes. Ruthie let me in with a face that had decided gossip wasn't so bad after all. The study was as I'd left it, except the bottom drawer was open a hand's width and the note lay center on the blotter like a dare. I photographed it, sniffed it, bagged it. Lemon oil again. The alarm panel showed no disarm since 6. I asked Ruthie, and she showed me a chime log the system produces if you know where to poke. At 8:19, the back door opened and closed within 5 seconds, neither arming nor disarming, just accepting. Someone with a code and a finger. Household. "Mr. Dane?" I asked. "He went out at 7:30, Ruthie said. "For a walk. Came back at 9. He doesn't walk. Not like that." I crouched at the drawer with a flashlight and angled it low. Wolfe's trick. The grain lit up, and with it something etched shallow and rubbed with oil so it hid until it wanted to be found. Letters. A word. 3, actually. Stacked like a motto. K-E-E-P-I-T-C-L-E-A-N. Old. Not tonight old. A habit carved into wood where the hand goes when the mind is somewhere between pride and compulsion. I felt the little click inside where the world's gear fits into Wolfe's. I phoned him from the hall. The drawer says, "Keep it clean." Carved. Old. The alarm didn't arm or disarm, but the back door chime logged open, close at 8:19. That note was placed by someone inside with the comfort of a resident and the ambition of a ghost. And there's a new sheen on the desk surface, in a circle where a bottle might have sat. The bottle's cap smudge is darker. Wolfe made the sound he saves for a fact sliding into its groove. So Mr. Dane's study is a shrine and a stage. He writes his commandments in wood. He polishes to calm himself. He leaves drawers open by inches because he believes air preserves virtue. And someone is writing him homilies in his own tone. "C for clean," I said. "Or C for copy," he said. "Tomorrow, the tube. Tonight, tell Mr. Dane that if he speaks to any press or rivals, I will drop him. And tell Mrs. Dane that one more trespass under her roof will compel me to end this in a manner she will not like." "You going to eat while I do laps?" I asked. "I will think," he said, "which in that house counts as fasting." On my way out, I looked once more at the desk, at the circle of renewed shine, at the faint carbon kiss on the edge of the drawer where fingers had been. The study was clean the way a conscience is when it's just finished arguing with itself. I told Ruthie to lock behind me and to ignore any lilies that tried to arrive after dark. Back at 35th, I found Wolfe still in the chair, eyes closed, fingers bridged. He didn't open them when I came in. "Tomorrow," he said, "we open a tube and perhaps a throat. And then we will arrange a gathering in which cleanliness ceases to be a virtue and reveals itself as a symptom." The morning started with the smell of Fritz's sourdough and Wolfe's silence, which is his version of a starting gun. We had our orders. Retrieve the tube from Noel's storage unit, with Noel present, Kendall in tow for propriety, and Celia to face whatever lived inside that cardboard cylinder. Wolfe would stay behind, not because he couldn't stomach the walk, but because he preferred to stage the aftermath in his own chair. At 8:45, I met Saul on the corner near the storage facility. He was leaning against a lamppost, coat buttoned to the throat, like a man who'd been keeping the weather from noticing him since dawn. "They're both here," he said. "Noel's trying to look like he's not sweating, and Celia's trying to look like she doesn't mind seeing him sweat." Inside, the manager's office had a faint hum from the vending machine and the smell of coffee that had been ready for hours. Noel produced his ID without my asking, because men who've been warned prefer to show they can follow at least one instruction. The keypad code worked on the first try. The green light on the door blinked like a reluctant blessing. The unit itself was neat in the way some crime scenes are neat. Order covering intent. Metal shelving, 2 plastic crates stacked, and there in the corner, the archival tube, upright as a soldier who knows he's being inspected. I had brought gloves. Noel handed me the tube without meeting my eye, and Celia stepped forward as if to claim it. "Hold," I said, because Wolfe's voice echoes in mine when the stakes are paper. I uncapped one end, careful as a man checking a snake's mood, and slid the contents out onto a clean muslin cloth I'd spread on a crate. One rolled sheet, thick, cream-colored, the kind that likes to remember its folds. I unrolled it under the clipboards I'd brought, and there it was, the dealer's letter Lydia had described, dated 1938, Virginia postmark, the ink browned and the language careful. It was a masterwork of implication. My examination leads me to suspect alterations may have been made to the markings on the socket bayonet prior to your acquisition. Nothing direct enough for a courtroom, but enough for an article in a collector's journal to set fires that never quite go out. "Unburned," I said, because Wolfe would ask first about condition. The paper smelled of lemon oil faintly, though whether from the Dane's study or the hands that moved it last was anyone's guess. Kendall had been quiet until then, arms crossed like a curator over a loaned piece. "This should have stayed in the museum's secured files," he said, "and the bayonet should have stayed in the Dane's cabinet," I told him. "But here we are." Celia met my eyes and didn't flinch. "I meant to keep it safe from both those possibilities," she said. "This," she gestured at Noel, "was the compromise. The wrong one." Noel cleared his throat like it owed him money. "You can tell Wolfe I've delivered it. I'm done." I rolled the letter back into its tube, sealed it in a plastic bag, and took it under my arm. "You're not done," I said. "You're just off stage until he calls you back." Back at the brownstone by 10:30, Wolfe examined the tube without touching the paper itself. He studied the bag, the faint oil stain on the seam, and the fold memory in the sheet. "It has been opened recently," he said, "but not altered. Fooey. Its preservation is incidental. Whoever took the bayonet did not care to destroy the letter, which means they either saw more value in it surviving or lacked the interest entirely. That still leaves us with a missing hunk of steel," I reminded him. "And Nero's who might keep it," he said. The bayonet has weight, bulk, and a signature. It cannot be tucked into a tube or slipped into a drawer without announcing itself to the touch. Whoever took it either intended to display it or to deliver it quickly to someone who would. Saul had been standing by the door. "That storage unit's too clean," he said. "Noel's been keeping it staged. If the bayonet had been there, it's long gone." Wolfe nodded. And if Mr. Noel had it, he would have sought to monetize it through someone other than Mr. Lant, whose methods he now fears. Which leaves Mr. Dane, who has the motive of control, the opportunity of residence, and the temperament to keep a contested relic as a private treasure while presenting an appearance of loss. I thought back to the etched motto in the drawer. "Keep it clean." In the right light, it was almost a dare. "You think he took it himself?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that he could not bear for either his rival or his allies to hold it. A man who carves commandments into furniture is a man who believes the world improves when he possesses its symbols." The phone rang then, and I picked it up. Lydia's voice, low and tight. "Archie, Howard's gone out again." "No word." "The study door is locked, which it never is during the day." "Don't force it," I told her. "We'll be there." Wolfe's eyes narrowed a fraction. "Bring Saul. If Mr. Dane has hidden the bayonet, he will not have hidden it far, and if he has moved it, I wish to know where before he has time to rehearse a reason." We made it uptown in 20 minutes. Lydia let us in, pale but composed, and led us to the locked study door. It wasn't much trouble for Saul. 2 minutes with a pick and the door swung inward. The room smelled of the same lemon oil, fresh enough to sting the nose. On the desk, a cloth lay folded neatly, the kind used to wrap metal for storage. The drawer with the oil was open again, but the bottle was gone. In its place sat a key, not to the cabinet, but to a case I hadn't seen before. We searched systematically. Behind the cabinet, under the window seat, nothing. Then Saul crouched at the base of a low bookcase against the far wall and tapped the side panel. Hollow. The screws on the trim were worn just enough to show they'd been turned in the last day. Inside, wrapped in a second cloth, was the bayonet. Even I could tell it had been polished. The steel gleamed in a way the past never does without help. The markings on the socket looked too sharp for a century's handling, but I left that for the experts. Saul lifted it just enough for Lydia to see. Her breath caught, but she didn't speak. We rewrapped it, locked the panel as we'd found it, and took the key from the desk. "Wolfe will need this," I told her. "Howard may think the safest place for a thing is under his own floorboards, but that's only true until the boards change owners." Back at the brownstone, I laid the cloth-wrapped steel and the desk key in front of Wolfe. He didn't touch either. "So," he said, "Mr. Dane deprives his rival of spectacle, his allies of choice, and his wife of the truth, all in the name of preservation. And he composes small sermons to himself. Be clean, to pretend that control is morality." "You going to tell him we found it?" I asked. "In my own time," he said. "First, we will have them all here again, the rival, the curator, the registrar, the director, the owner. We will tell them a version of the truth that serves the museum, keeps the object where it will be least harmful, and deprives Mr. Lant of his noise." "And the real truth?" "That will be between Mr. Dane and his study," Wolfe said, "and his wife if she wishes it. If she does not, then he will polish it until the day comes when polishing no longer comforts him." He glanced at the tube on his desk, then at the cloth beside it. "2 artifacts, both in need of context. We will give them one this evening." He closed his eyes, signaling the day's thinking had shifted into arrangement. "Archie, summon them. Same hour as before. This time, we will finish." By the time I'd made the calls, the air in the office had taken on that heavy stillness Wolfe cultivates when he's winding the string for the last pull. He didn't need to tell me the order. Dane, Lant, Kendall, Celia, Noel. All at 7, no excuses. The wording I used was polite enough to keep them from bolting, but pointed enough to remind them that Wolfe's invitations weren't optional unless you were willing to live with his conclusions delivered in absentia. At 6:55, the doorbell sounded like the opening note of a score I'd already memorized. Howard Dane came first, wearing the kind of expression men use when they're prepared to be wronged and want witnesses. His coat went on the rack without ceremony. Lant followed with his trademark aroma and a smile that would have been at home on a cat crossing into a bird cage. Kendall drifted in at 7:02, carrying himself like a man whose own presence was proof of reason. Celia arrived precisely on the hour, her composure pressed and buttoned. Noel came last, hair damp from a hasty shower, tie a fraction off-center, and eyes set on the floor like it might offer him lines to read. Wolfe let them settle, a long moment where the only sound was chair legs meeting carpet. When he spoke, it was without preamble. "We have recovered both the letter and the bayonet." That was the kind of line you don't toss out unless you enjoy the ensuing silence. Dane's head came up sharply. Lant's grin froze. Kendall's fingers tightened on the armrest. Celia's eyes flickered once to Noel, and Noel swallowed like the air had thickened. "The letter," Wolfe continued, "was found in a storage unit rented under the name of Mr. Noel's cousin, with Mr. Noel as authorized user. It was placed there by Dr. Marsh, at her request, to preserve it from destruction. The bayonet was concealed in Mr. Dane's study, in a compartment beneath a bookcase. Its condition suggests recent polishing." Dane started to speak, but Wolfe raised a hand, half an inch of movement that carried more weight than a shout. "You will have your turn. The events are as follows. Mr. Noel used a duplicate key to the cabinet 4 days before the theft, authorized originally for Dr. Marsh. Mr. Lant inquired at a locksmith the night before the theft, coincident with his ongoing public challenge to the bayonet's authenticity. The following night, both the bayonet and the letter vanished from the Danes' home, and a kitchen knife, polished free of prints, was left on Mr. Dane's desk as a signature. Days later, notes bearing the phrase, "Be clean," scented with the lemon oil from Mr. Dane's desk, were left in the Danes' home. One was written by Dr. Marsh, the other by an unknown hand imitating hers. Lydia Dane hadn't been invited, but her presence was in the air. Dane's jaw shifted. Lant lounged like he'd paid for the seat. Celia sat straight, her hands folded but white at the knuckles. "The letter," Wolfe said, "is now in the custody of Mr. Kendall, who will arrange for its evaluation and secure storage at the Whitcomb. The bayonet will likewise be returned to the museum under conditions to be set by the lender, Mr. Dane, and the institution. Public disclosure will be managed so as to prevent sensationalism." "That's impossible," Lant cut in, the kind of interruption that's more about the room hearing you than the person you're addressing. "A piece with this much scandal baked in? You can't keep it quiet. You'd have to invent a—" "You will not invent anything," Wolfe said, his tone flattening Lant's smile. "Your role, Mr. Lant, was to press the question of authenticity until it produced noise. You sought to use Mr. Noel and Dr. Marsh to create that noise at your convenience. Instead, you will be silent, for the museum will arrange an independent review in which your opinion will be neither solicited nor considered. You will abide by this, or I will ensure the police see your visit to the locksmith and your coordination with Mr. Noel as the prelude to a burglary." Lant's eyes narrowed, but for once, he had nothing ready. "Dr. Marsh," Wolfe went on, "your stated intention was to protect the museum from a hasty or politically driven choice. You achieved this by removing the letter, which was improper but understandable. You will assist in the review of the bayonet, but you will not control the narrative of its provenance alone." Celia inclined her head once. Acceptance without surrender. "Mr. Noel," Wolfe said, turning the weight of his attention, "you will consider your cooperation in recovering the letter as the first of several steps you will take to prevent your dismissal from becoming your legacy. You will provide the police with a statement confirming that Mr. Lant encouraged you to gain access to the cabinet and that Dr. Marsh instructed you to place the letter in storage. If you omit or alter this, I will supply my own version." Noel's voice was barely above a murmur. "Yes, Mr. Wolfe." "And you?" Mr. Dane Wolfe's tone changed, not softer, but heavier. "You removed the bayonet from your own cabinet. You concealed it in your study to keep it from your rival, from the museum, and, I suspect, from your wife. You left a polished knife on your desk as a symbol and perhaps as a private satisfaction. You then received, or pretended to receive, notes echoing your own motto carved into your desk. Keep it clean. I do not care whether you intended these as misdirection or ritual. The fact remains that you deprived all parties of an object under review and turned a matter of scholarship into a matter of theater. You will return the bayonet to the museum under conditions I will outline. You will not, under any circumstance, attempt to reclaim it before the review is complete." Dane's face was a study in restrained fury. "And if I refuse?" "Then you will be seen," Wolfe said, "as the man who removed an object potentially linked to a murder from a collection under investigation and kept it hidden. That will be your reputation in court, in the press, and in the minds of those who once took you seriously." The silence that followed had weight. Dane looked at the others, and whatever he saw, there was enough to make him lean back and say, "Fine, but the review will be on my terms." "No," Wolfe said, closing his eyes in that final way of his. "It will be on the terms of fact. You may attend, you may speak, but you will not dictate. And if you attempt to do so, you will find the bayonet returned to you only when it has no value to anyone, not even you." I watched the air change, the way it does when the final move on the board has been made and everyone knows it. Kendall was already calculating the phrasing of a press release. Lant was deciding whether silence could be spun into mystery. Celia was steady, her eyes on a point only she could see. Noel looked like a man who'd just been told the bill for his dinner would be paid, but he'd still have to do the dishes. Dane was staring at Wolfe, but the fight had shifted. Less about winning now, more about salvaging something in private. Wolfe opened his eyes. "That is all. Mr. Goodwin will coordinate the physical return of both items to the museum tomorrow morning. Mr. Kendall will confirm the chain of custody. Dr. Marsh, you will prepare the bayonet for examination. Mr. Dane, you will refrain from entering the museum until invited. Mr. Lant, you will refrain from speaking of this to anyone outside this room. And Mr. Noel, be clean." It wasn't a request. They left in an order that said something about their priorities. Kendall first, to get ahead of the story. Celia next, to start controlling the review. Lant, with a glance over his shoulder that promised he'd find another angle. Noel keeping pace with no one, and Dane last, his coat over his arm, his eyes on the floor. When the door shut behind him, Wolfe exhaled in a way that meant the case was done for him, even if the museum's review would grind on for months. "Archie," he said, "dinner." Fritz must have been listening from the kitchen. The smell of roast chicken was already drifting in. I poured 2 beers and set them on the desk. "You could have handed Dane to the police," I said. "I could have," Wolfe agreed, "and in so doing would have ensured the bayonet was lost to inquiry. The letter was discredited as a plant, and the museum was consumed by noise. This way, the truth has a chance, which is more than most truths are afforded." "And the be clean notes?" "Self-indulgence," he said. "First from Dr. Marsh, then from someone imitating her, Mr. Dane most likely, to please himself with his own secrecy. Men will polish steel, wood, even paper when they cannot polish their own names." He reached for his beer, and his mouth turned in the faintest suggestion of a smile. "Now, Archie, we will eat, and tomorrow we will return to more important matters. My orchids are overdue for repotting, and they at least have never lied to me." Dinner did what it was supposed to, quiet the house and loosen the tight places in a man's head. Only Wolfe doesn't loosen. he rearranges. He let Fritz clear, reached for his beer, and said it as if we'd both been holding the last card and knew it. We have not yet accounted for Peter Rell. I had been waiting for that shoe. You've been saving him for dessert. Dessert, he said, is for sweetness. This is for closure. He tapped the tube with a finger and then the cloth-wrapped steel beside it. Noise and steel. The letter explains temptation. The bayonet explains opportunity. What remains is motive sufficient for a man to kill in silence and to polish afterward. Lant likes noise, not silence, I said. Celia likes process, not panic. Dane likes control, not blood. That leaves the registrar class. He said. Process men, when broken, become processes parody. They polish. Graham Noel, I said. Call him, Wolfe said. Tell him one more point must be clarified to prevent the museum from regretting its lenience. He will return, and call Mr. Kendall and Dr. Marsh. Mr. Dane and Mr. Lant need not attend. Their utility is exhausted. It took 15 minutes to collect them. Fare is punctual. Noel arrived first, the tie now centered, hair combed into submission. Kendall next, mouth prepared for compromise. Celia last, eyes steady but shadowed. I set them in their previous chairs and stood by the globe. Wolfe didn't waste anyone's time. Mr. Noel, this will be short, he said. 3 weeks ago, after hours, you entered the Whitcomb's collections room to retrieve the Virginia letter. Mr. Rell surprised you. You seized a socket bayonet from the nearest case, struck once, and then polished the blade until no prints remained. You replaced it. You sent no alarm because you could compose the logs. You returned home with your hands shaking and wrote nothing down. When the Danes' house later offered you a stage, you wrote again. Be clean, a benediction to yourself in a hand you had watched Dr. Marsh form for years. Noel's face did an interesting thing. Instead of falling apart, it held like a bad repair. Kendall half rose and sat again. Celia didn't move. That's fiction, Noel said, but not the way you say it when you believe it. His eyes were calculating distances, door to hallway, chair to rug, past to future. It is deduction, Wolfe said. You will prefer it to proof if you have any sense. Proof will come with swabs and microcrystals and your name on the chain of custody, whereas deduction offers dignity. But do as you like. Mr. Goodwin, the items. I laid the bayonet on the desk, still wrapped, and set beside it a plain envelope Wolfe had prepared while Fritz was washing the last pan. He didn't open either. He let their presence dress the room. Triangular wounds, Wolfe went on, are not rare in 19th century death, but they are rare in 21st century registrars. They require a particular instrument that museums like to keep within reach of men like Mr. Rell. Mr. Lant owns blades. Mr. Dane loans them. Dr. Marsh catalogues them. Mr. Noel signs for them. Of those, only one both needed that letter gone and had the habit of graphite on his hands. Noel's eyes snapped to me and then to the envelope. He knew he was supposed to ask. You were told to check Rell's desk, Wolfe said to me without looking. You did? This morning, I said. Underside edge, right knee position, graphite transfer in a pattern like the smear we lifted at the Dane's desk. Not from today. A habit. Rell leaned when he worked. I kept my voice neutral. The same kind of transfer was under Mr. Dane's desk only once. New and solitary. Wolfe inclined his head. A registrar's glove that has handled a pencil will mark wood. Later, the same material marks a lemon-oiled cap and a desk edge that never before carried such a stain. Mr. Dane's study became a stage. But 3 weeks ago, there was no stage, only a startled man, a blade, and a panic. Kendall found his voice, hushed by policy. This is dangerous territory, Mr. Wolfe. Truth always is, Wolfe said pleasantly, but we may proceed gently. Mr. Noel, the police can and will apply a Hemin test to detect blood residues even on a polished steel. They will test the blade, the socket interior, and the scabbard if you are foolish enough to sheathe it afterward. They will test the case felt in the Whitcomb. Blood carries memory longer than reputations do, or... Noel swallowed again. He didn't look at Celia. He looked at the cloth. Or you may tell the truth and spare the Whitcomb a spectacle, Wolfe said. Mr. Rell surprised you. You swung because fear is faster than thought. You polished because ritual promised absolution. He shut his eyes. Be clean. Noel's shoulders wilted a fraction. He wasn't supposed to be there, he said. He never stayed late on Thursdays. The sign-out book, he'd written 5. I'd waited. I just needed the letter out of the building so Kendall couldn't tell me to lock it behind 3 keys and forget the Danes existed. Lant said... He stopped, shook his head. Lant talks. He doesn't do. I did. Rell came in with his bag and his careful face and said my name, and I panicked. It was only one motion. He looked surprised. Then it was so much blood for a weapon that's supposed to be history. I wiped. I wiped until my hands didn't look like hands. I put it back. I thought, if I clean enough, it won't be real. Kendall shut his eyes once, in a slow bow to the inevitable. Celia breathed out through her nose. And then, Wolfe said, you saw a chance to turn cleanliness into message. You imitated Dr. Marsh's hand to speak to Mr. Dane in a language he would admire. Be clean. You liked watching him receive sermons in his chapel. Noel didn't deny it. It kept things orderly, he said, and in that sentence you could hear the world that had built him give way under his feet. It made it seem as if someone had a plan. Someone did, Wolfe said. It just wasn't you. He lifted a finger toward the envelope, and I slid it across to Noel. He didn't open it. A note for Inspector Kramer, Wolfe said. Prepared before you arrived, because I am not a gambler. It recommends leniency in charging decisions in exchange for immediate confession and cooperation. Mr. Kendall will confirm that the museum will not obstruct. Dr. Marsh will confirm that you acted at least in part under her request to move the letter, though not to kill, which no one requested. If you sign it and then call your counsel, the sequence will be kinder than you deserve. Kinder, perhaps, than you imagine yourself. Noel's hands flexed. He opened the envelope, scanned 2 lines, and closed it again like he could keep the words inside by pressing. He'd have called security, he said, and I realized he wasn't talking to us. He would have written me up. That's what I was afraid of. A form, a line with my name on it. Now you will have one, Wolfe said, with something that might have been compassion in another life. But it will be the right line. Kendall stood, not to leave, to assume responsibility. I will call our counsel, he said, and I will call the precinct. He turned to Noel. Graham, you will go with me. There will be statement and surrender. We will not pretend we discovered this by ourselves. We will simply not allow anyone else to write it first. Noel nodded and looked at Celia. Finally. She didn't look away. You should have told me, she said, and it wasn't accusation. It was a statement of 2 lives that could have gone elsewhere if words had arrived on time. After they left, the sound of the outer door softer than you'd expect for a man's life changing, Celia remained. She didn't ask for absolution, and Wolfe didn't offer it. You will still convene an independent review, she said. Yes, Wolfe said, and you will still tell the truth. You will not curate your conscience as you curate your cases. She inclined, stood, and went, lighter by a weight that hadn't been hers, and heavier by one that was. When the house closed again around us, I leaned on the edge of the desk and looked at the 2 artifacts that had caused the ruckus and the ruin. You are sure about the test, Bluff? I asked. I was sure he would not test me, Wolfe said. But if he had, Blood obeys chemistry more faithfully than donors obey reason. We would have had our proof. He made a face as if at a poor vintage. I prefer confessions to laboratories. They render a cleaner. Line, you and your cleanliness, I said. He gave me the side eye. That means avoid cheap mimicry. I prefer the word precise. Clean has been sullied. We handled the practicalities. A call to Kramer that consisted of 3 sentences and a silence long enough for him to decide not to bark. Arrangements with Kendall for morning transfers, stamped with signatures and custody at each step. A brief message to Lydia Dane, promising an end to visitors carrying lemon oil in their pockets. Fritz brought coffee and a tart that tasted like restraint done right. I asked what I always ask when the room has been emptied of other people's haste. Why did you really keep the bayonet out on the desk, wrapped but present, while Noel was here? Because men confess more efficiently in the presence of their instruments, he said. He did not want to look at it and could not avoid it. Denial requires a horizon. I nodded, because you can't argue with a man who's already staged your next 3 moves. The phone rang once more near 10. Lydia. I took it in the hall and told her what needed telling and what didn't. She didn't cry. She thanked me. She asked one question. Will Howard be exposed? I gave her Wolfe's answer in words that were mine. Only as much as the truth requires. Not for sport. Back in the office, I found Wolfe with his eyes closed and his hands steepled, focus turned to the room where he keeps unusual things, orchids, maxims, and the better kind of endings. Tomorrow morning, he said without opening his eyes, Mr. Goodwin will oversee a transfer. By noon, Mr. Kramer will have his confession. By evening, the Whitcomb will draft a statement that uses the word integrity twice and process 3 times. And by dinner, we will be permitted to return to matters of real importance. Orchids, I said. Sauce, he said. The trout amandine needed 10 seconds less last night. Fritz was preoccupied. We must correct the trend. I laughed because he had earned it. You think Dane will live with it? The review, the possibility that the story loses to the steel? He will live with the version of it that permits him to continue polishing something, Wolfe said. If not the bayonet, then his remorse. Men like Mr. Dane do not surrender rituals. They replace them. And Lant? Lant will hint at secrets he does not own and sell invitations he has not received. Mr. Kendall will outlast him by counting to 10 between every verb. Dr. Marsh will earn what she keeps. He opened his eyes a fraction. And you, Archie, will sleep the sleep of the industrious. I said I'd settle for the sleep of the newly unworried and started for the door. He stopped me with a finger. Archie. Yeah? The title bothers me, he said. Not the words, the act, polishing after the crime. There is an old Roman maxim, abstine et sustine, forbear and endure. Modern men have traded it for polish and pretend. I prefer the old. Philosophical closure? I said, because if he was going to give me one, I'd frame it. He allowed the barest of smiles. Ethical, not philosophical. The first belongs to men, the second to parlors. Good night. I left him to his chair and his orchids, and the city went back to being a place where people kept their knives in drawers and their letters in files. In the morning, we'd move steel and paper under watchful eyes and ballpoint pens, and the museum would put on its gravest face and say the necessary words. But for one evening, the brownstone was clean, not polished, not staged, just right. And if that sounds like satisfaction, don't worry, it won't go to my head. Wolfe keeps me too busy for that. The morning had the kind of brittle clarity New York saves for days when you have work you can't avoid. By 8:30, I was standing in the Whitcomb's side loading bay, clipboard in one hand, bayonet in its wrapping in the other, the Virginia letter already sealed and tagged in a separate courier pouch. Kendall was there with the posture of a man who'd prefer to conduct all business through glass, and Celia stood beside him, her hair tied back. the look in her eyes saying she'd measured every person in the room and filed them by usefulness. The paperwork took longer than moving the items. Kendall insisted on reading each line aloud before signing, as if the words might shift under his pen. Celia inspected the bayonet without touching the metal, her gaze tracing the markings that had caused all the trouble. She looked up once, catching my eye. "If it's altered, we'll know," she said. "But knowing doesn't always mean telling." "That's Wolfe's line," I told her. "Truth doesn't come with a guarantee it'll be printed." She didn't smile. "Then we'll make sure it's at least kept." By 9:15, both items were logged into the museum's secure storage under a fresh lock that Kendall opened and shut twice for effect. I signed the final line, tucked the clipboard under my arm, and left them to whatever process would look like in their official statement. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the plant rooms, which meant I had a half-hour before he'd descend, with his mind already arranged in the order of his orchids. I used it to phone Kramer. He'd already had Noel's confession, delivered by Kendall's counsel and, from the sound of it, read with a cigar in hand. "You're telling me the museum's not pressing charges for the burglary?" he said, not really asking. "They get their letter back, the bayonet for review, and a registrar's resignation instead of a trial. Keeps their donors from learning new vocabulary." Kramer grunted. "And Wolfe gets his neat bow on it. Fine, but I'll tell you, Goodwin, this whole thing stinks of people deciding which part of the truth they like best. You'd think polishing a knife was a hobby in that circle." "It is," I said. "Only some use steel, some use paper." When Wolfe came down, I gave him the rundown. Items transferred, Kramer briefed, Noel in custody but not in headlines. He listened, eyes on the globe, one fingertip resting on South America, like he was checking the temperature there. "And Mr. Lant?" he asked. "Silent so far," I said. "But that's probably him taking a deep breath before telling someone over lunch how he could have blown the whole thing wide open." "He will," Wolfe said, "and by doing so will remind everyone of his proximity to an arrest. Mr. Kendall will survive the review. Dr. Marsh will secure her role in the museum's hierarchy. Mr. Dane will accept the verdict if it suits him and ignore it if it doesn't. His wife will know more than she says, which will preserve the peace. The bayonet will rest, and the letter will sleep." "Satisfactory." "You sound almost content," I said. He made a face that in anyone else would have been a shrug. "It is a rare thing for events to resolve without the need to excise or distort too greatly. I have not had to forego dinner once during the process. That is contentment enough." The bell rang just then. Fritz answered, and a moment later, Lydia Dane stood in the doorway. She looked less tightly wound than she had on her first visit, but there was a steadiness to her that wasn't there before. "I came to thank you," she said, stepping in when Wolfe inclined his head. "Not just for finding what was missing, but for deciding how much of it the world should see. Howard understands." She paused. "Or he pretends to, which for now is the same thing." Wolfe regarded her for a long moment. "You have what you wished?" "I have enough," she said. "The rest can wait." He accepted that with a small nod. "Then take care that your study remains your own. Leave your husband his rituals, but not his stage." She gave me a faint smile as she left. "You were right," she said in the hall. "It wasn't about the bayonet. It was about keeping it clean." After she was gone, I closed the door and came back into the office. "So that's that," I said. "For now," Wolfe said. "Objects like that carry their own gravity. Someone will orbit it again in time, but not here. Not now." The rest of the day slid into the comfortable routine of a case closed. I typed up my notes for the files, including the sequence of events Wolfe had laid out in that final meeting, a version trimmed of every flourish and omission we'd agreed to keep. Saul dropped by around 4, with nothing to report, except that Lant had been seen leaving a midtown lunch alone, which for Lant meant his audience had gotten bored before dessert. Evening brought Fritz's veal chops and Wolfe's unhurried appetite. The only reference to the case was when he reached for the salt and said, "Polish is not preservation. In horticulture or humanity." I asked if that was going in his book of maxims. "No," he said, "it is too case-specific, and too many people think they understand Polish." After dinner, I sat with a book and half an ear on the city outside. The brownstone had that settled weight it gets when all the loose ends are tied off, even if the knots aren't perfect. Wolfe read in silence, the faint rustle of a page the only sound until he closed the book and looked at me. "Archie, you may destroy the graphite tape from the Dane's desk," he said. "It has served its purpose. And the photographs of the compartment in Mr. Dane's study, we will keep them. They may prove useful should the bayonet ever require rescuing again." "You really think it might?" He gave the kind of look that folds certainty and inevitability into one. "It will. Men like Mr. Dane do not stop owning a thing simply because someone else holds it. They wait." I nodded, because he was right, and for the moment at least, the waiting belonged to someone else. The case of the knife polished after the crime was finished in the books, even if, as Kramer said, the whole thing still smelled faintly of lemon oil and self-importance. By the time I turned in, the brownstone was dark, except for the glow from the plant rooms upstairs. Wolfe was tending his orchids, as he always did when the world outside had been too full of people and their performances. And if I thought about a polished knife and a carved motto in the base of a drawer, it wasn't because the mystery was unsolved. It was because some habits, like some cases, never stop reflecting the light, no matter how carefully you put them away. By 8 o'clock that evening, the brownstone was the stage it always becomes when Wolfe decides the curtain will fall in his own house. The players were all back. Dane, Lydia at his side this time, Celia, Kendall, Lant, and even Noel, pale but steadier after his time with Kendall's counsel. Saul was there too, in the background, quiet as a wall. Wolfe didn't stand. He never does. He sat with the bayonet laid out on the desk in its wrapping, the Virginia letter beside it, and one of the lemon-scented notes resting between his fingertips. The room waited. "This began," he said, "as two thefts, the bayonet and the letter. In truth, it began weeks earlier, with the killing of Mr. Peter Rell. The link was not in the noise surrounding the bayonet's authenticity, nor in the rivalry between Mr. Dane and Mr. Lant, but in the behavior of a man who lives by procedure." His eyes rested on Noel, who met them without speaking. Mr. Noel sought the letter to protect his position and to influence the museum's choices. He entered after hours, believing the collections room empty. Mr. Rell surprised him. In panic, he struck with the nearest object, a socket bayonet on display, inflicting a wound that could only be made by such an instrument. He polished the blade to remove all prints, because cleanliness to him was control. He replaced it, and left with the letter. Lydia's hand tightened on Dane's arm. Lant leaned back, pretending to be a spectator at someone else's drama, but not entirely convincing. In the weeks after, Wolfe continued, the scandal over the bayonet's provenance became the perfect cover for Mr. Noel's removal of both items from the Danes' home. At Dr. Marsh's request for the letter, at Mr. Lant's prompting for the bayonet. Mr. Dane, however, removed the bayonet himself before they could take it, concealing it in his study. He left the polished knife on his desk as a message, perhaps to himself, perhaps to his rival. And then someone, Mr. Noel, began leaving notes scented with Mr. Dane's own lemon oil, echoing a motto carved in his desk. "Keep it clean. A ritual repeated becomes a signal." Celia spoke, her voice measured. "I never told him to kill. I only wanted the letter safe until the museum could decide." "You did not tell him to kill," Wolfe agreed. "But you involved him, and thus he involved himself entirely. And you, Mr. Lant, you set fires in other people's rooms so you could watch the smoke. In this case, the smoke nearly obscured the truth." Lant's mouth curled. Nearly. Wolfe said. His failure. He let the silence stretch, pinning each of them in it before turning to Kendall. The letter and the bayonet are returned to your custody. The review will proceed. Mr. Noel will resign and provide a full statement. The museum will speak of integrity and process, and you will say nothing about lemon oil, polished knives, or mottos carved into drawers. Kendall inclined his head. Understood. Mr. Dane, Wolfe said at last, you have what you wanted. Your rival deprived, your object preserved, your reputation intact enough to survive. But you will not again use your study as a stage for petty theatre. If you do, I will take the performance away from you entirely. Dane's answer was short. Agreed. Wolfe closed his eyes, signaling the play was over. That is all. Good night. They left in twos and threes, the tension peeling away with each departure until the brownstone was quiet again. I stood by the desk, looking at the bayonet still wrapped in its cloth. You could have given Dane to Kramer, I said. I could have given them all to Kramer, Wolfe said. But the truth in the wrong hands becomes noise, and noise obscures more than it reveals. This way, the facts are preserved, the murder is confessed, and the object will be judged in the light it deserves. He reached for his beer. And Archie, Polish is no substitute for purity. I grinned. Want me to carve that in your desk? Pfui, he said, and leaned back. Already done with them all. The brownstone settled into its usual rhythm, quiet, deliberate, clean. And this time, there was no smell of lemon oil in the air. Only the faint satisfaction of a case concluded on Wolfe's terms, which is as close to perfection as anyone in that room was going to get, and 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 was going